Welcome, future educators, to this explainer. Okay, so today we're jumping right into Chapter 2, Causes of Exceptionalities. Understanding exactly why and how developmental delays and disabilities occur, that is absolutely crucial for your future work. We're not just talking about abstract medical textbook concepts here. No, we're talking about the day-to-day realities that the children in your future classrooms are going to bring with them every single day. So let's just get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Genetics and chromosomal disorders, 2. Pregnancy and birthing complications, 3. Illnesses, accidents, and environment, 4. Trauma, abuse, and neglect, and finally, 5. Trends and autism research. All right, starting off with Section 1, Genetics and chromosomal disorders, the biological foundation. So to really wrap our heads around exceptionalities, we have to start at the very beginning, right? The biological building blocks laid down at conception literally set the stage for everything else. Now, our genetic code holds this incredible amount of information, but it can also carry potential defects. Take inherited genetic disorders like sickle cell disease, for example. What happens here is that because of a recessive gene, blood cells become deformed and they just can't carry oxygen properly. For a child, this means dealing with real pain, profound fatigue, and shortness of breath. It directly impacts their physical, motor, and cognitive abilities. As a future educator, you really need to recognize that these aren't just, files in a medical cabinet. These are physical realities that will totally dictate how a child engages with your lesson plans and your activities. And this brilliantly illustrates another really key point: cystic fibrosis. This is another recessive genetic disorder, and it causes kids to produce this very thick mucus that clogs their lungs and pancreas. Now, the good news is, thanks to amazing medical advancements, life expectancy for these kids has vastly improved. But what does that mean for you? Well, it means these children will absolutely be actively learning in your early childhood programs. They're going to require specific medical accommodations. And this really reinforces a vital truth. As an early childhood educator, you're not just a teacher. You are actually an active, super observant part of a much broader healthcare and support team for that child. Let's move on to Section 2. Pregnancy and birthing complications, the prenatal environment. Okay, so once that biological foundation is laid, the external environment actually starts interacting with fetal development right there in the womb. Now you're going to see this word a lot: teratogen. A prenatal teratogen is basically any environmental agent that can cause harm to the developing embryo or fetus. We're talking about things like drugs, excessive hormones, heavy metals like lead and mercury, radiation, or even certain viruses. But what's absolutely crucial for your notes here is the timing. The developing fetus is incredibly vulnerable during the embryonic stage. That's just 3 to 8 weeks after conception. This is exactly when major organs like the brain and the heart are just beginning to develop. So exposure during this specific window can cause severe long-term developmental consequences. Now, nature does have a defense mechanism, and that's the placenta. It transmits food, it transports waste, and it acts as a filter for the fetus, keeping those bloodstreams separate. But, and this is a big but, it is not a perfect shield. It's a filter, right? It's not a brick wall. So when destructive substances or poisons do manage to slip through that placental barrier, they directly impact the fetus's developing brain and nervous system. And it's not just external substances that can cross this barrier. It's also internal stress. Think about it. When a pregnant female experiences severe stress, whether that's from poverty, domestic abuse, or just a total lack of support, her body goes into fight or flight mode. It produces adrenaline, which actually reduces the amount of blood sent to the fetus. On top of that, stress produces these hormones called corticosteroids. These can severely aggravate fetal blood flow and negatively affect the developing brain, which sadly leads to future learning disabilities and developmental delays. Fast forward a bit to the end of the pregnancy. The actual birthing process itself carries some pretty significant risks. Complications like a breech birth, which is when the baby's bottom enters the birth canal first, or things like maternal diabetes, well, they can cause oxygen deprivation. And here's the thing, even really brief periods without oxygen can impact the central nervous system. It can trigger severe cognitive delays and mess with the development of the brain's neural connections. This is exactly why fetal monitoring and medical interventions like C-sections are heavily relied upon. They're there to protect the child's developmental future. Moving right along to Section 3, illnesses, accidents, and environment, entering the world. All right, so the child has entered the world, but now they have to navigate a whole new set of physical and environmental hazards. Their immediate environment plays a massive role in their developmental trajectory. Right now, we're actually seeing an increase in childhood illnesses that lead to disabilities. Why? Well, it's partly due to a decline in infant immunizations here in the United States, along with an influx of children coming from regions where certain diseases just haven't been eradicated yet. Then you add environmental pollution to the mix, particularly lead poisoning. And statistically, this affects kids from low-income backgrounds at much higher rates. These environmental threats are a big deal because they can cause both short and long-term disabilities that directly impact a student's academic success. So the crucial point is this honestly shocking statistic. Accidents actually cause more deaths in young children in the United States than illnesses do. Think about that. Near drowning, falls, car crashes. These are the leading threats. And head injuries, in particular, tend to have the most severe and long-lasting impact on a child's ability to learn. Just one accident can radically and permanently change a child's developmental trajectory in an instant. And that right there makes classroom safety and parent education a massive priority for you as an educator. Which brings us to Section 4, Trauma, Abuse, and Neglect, the social structure. Moving into the social and emotional environment, you're going to hear the term ACEs a lot. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Basically, these are traumatic events that happen anytime from birth up to age 17. And the thing you have to understand is that the impact of severe trauma isn't just a bad memory. It actually alters a child's biology. It can result in long-term emotional disturbance, depleted immune systems, even heart and lung disease way later in life. And for our purposes, it severely impacts a child's ability to focus, behave appropriately, and actually learn in your classroom. For your notes, it's really vital to clearly categorize child maltreatment. We're talking about enduring, persistent effects on a child's health and development caused by a caregiver. Now, abuse is a non-accidental injury. It's directly inflicted or allowed to be inflicted. This covers physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Neglect, on the other hand, is a failure to provide for a child's basic needs. That could be physical, medical, educational, supervisory, or emotional neglect. And please remember this. Early childhood educators are often mandatory reporters. You are quite literally the first line of defense in identifying these traumas, simply because you are the one seeing these children every single day. And finally, Section 5, Trends and Autism Research, the Educational Landscape. Looking at the child entering the broader educational system, the landscape has just completely transformed. We've seen a massive increase in children receiving special education services over the last 30 years. A lot of this is thankfully due to new laws and much better attitudes toward early intervention. But we have a very serious systemic issue here. African American, Native American, and Hispanic or Latino students are starkly overrepresented in special education programs. But simultaneously, they are underrepresented in gifted and talented programs. As future educators, it is absolutely essential that you recognize these demographic disparities. Now, what's really interesting about this slide, and honestly quite alarming, is understanding exactly why this demographic imbalance happens. According to the data, it is very often due to false positives. That means identifying a kid as having a disability when in reality, they don't. How does that happen? Well, it can stem from assessment instruments that just don't account for diverse backgrounds. It comes from institutional bias, conflicts in cultural values, and the really broad impacts of poverty. A false positive is incredibly harmful. It wrongly labels a child, it completely alters their educational path, and it directly contributes to this exact overrepresentation we just talked about. Let's wrap up our content by looking at how our understanding of exceptionalities actually evolves over time. A perfect example is autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Historically, the medical field really struggled to pinpoint a cause, and sadly, this led to some early theories that actually placed the blame on the parents. No way, right? Thankfully, scientific research has moved us far, far past that. Now, in the early 2000s, we saw a huge surge in diagnoses, but that was primarily because the Diagnostic Manual, the DSM, published a much broader definition of the disorder. Today, our current understanding is that there is no single cause. Rather, ASD is the result of a highly complex interaction between a child's genetic predispositions and their environment. Which brings us to the most important part of this entire explainer, you. We've covered the biological foundations, we talked about prenatal risks, environmental hazards, trauma, and some major systemic trends. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As an early childhood educator, how are you going to use this clinical knowledge to prevent accidents, structure a truly safe environment, and actively advocate for the exceptional children in your future classroom? Remember, you are not just teaching a curriculum, you are shaping lives. Take these concepts, keep them at the absolute forefront of your mind, and let them empower you to make a real difference.